Good morning and welcome to this chat about copyright and licensing with regard to developing digital learning resources. My name is Zach Gribble and I'm a subject specialist at JISC for digital practice and platforms, and I'm joined today by John. So John, would you like to say who you are and what your role is at JISC?
Thanks, Zach. Yes, my name's John Kelly. I'm a subject specialist with JISC and I'm focusing and concentrating on the legal aspects and how they affect education. So things like digital, like data protection and copyright and that sort of stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. So the reason we are here today is we're running some sessions with regard to creating digital learning resources. And with staff from FE, from ACL, and from Work-Based Learning. One of the most important best practices when developing digital learning resources is being aware of the content you have in them. Have you written it all yourself, or have you used workbooks content, or have you taken some content from the internet? And if you have acquired the content from somewhere, you need to be aware of the copyright law that's applied to it. So, John, my first question really is what does copyright law mean?
Oh, that's a very sensible question, really, because it's one of those things that affects us, even though we don't always realize it does. Copyright law is really a form of property. So, in the same way as you have to get permission, or in some way to use someone else's property, you have to get their permission to use their intellectual property. And that, I think we understand that from things like music and books and stuff, that it belongs to someone. And if we want to use it, we either pay them in some form to use it. And it's usually in the form of a license.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. So if I'm an educator in work-based learning, how could it affect me? Because I know there's quite a few different setups with regard to how a work-based learner, or WBL, say, provider may be working, for a higher organisation or an independent. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, I think that as educators, whether that's in the workplace or in a college or anywhere, whether as adults or anybody else, you're taking content from elsewhere. You're using other people's stuff, and as I said, the law applies to that. In education, we're very lucky. There are exceptions which allow us to use other people's stuff without an awful lot of interaction with them. You have what's called copyright exceptions.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of it then, as I mentioned earlier, is licenses.
Yeah.
Normally how we use stuff is we license it. We pay for it either by some sort of collective arrangement or by some sort of fee. So there are a number of setups like that, but it does affect us all. It affects every educator. And as I said, it's how we use other people's stuff.
Okay, with regard to licenses, I know I've got that written down to speak a little bit later on. But I mean, we think is that licenses? Is that what we get from Creative Commons and things like that? Is that what we mean by licenses?
Yes, Creative Commons is a very interesting one. Creative Commons is a form of a license where the owner of the content has decided they're happy to let other people use it for certain limited purposes, and that would include education, for example, commonly. So they won't charge a fee, or they won't expect you to pay a fee if they use the Creative Commons license. And the Creative Commons license is the mechanism for doing that, and it's worldwide. And it's a very useful and very powerful stuff. But often, I suppose, more commonly, what an educators are using are content that's quite current, that's quite, I suppose, high value, and especially I'm thinking of quite specialized, detailed diagrams and documentation that would be used in the workplace. Those belong to someone. A lot of investment has gone into them. Somebody owns them. They want payback for it, if you like, and they're happy for everybody to use it. They want people to use it. There's no restrictions on them to use it. But the caveat is that you pay for it. They just want payment for it, and that's the system.
That's the system. Okay, so if someone wants to use some content they've seen, and and they want to put in the learning resource, like those charts or those graphs, I mean, how would they go about using it? Do they just need to ask for permission? Is it that simple?
It is that simple. Someone owns it. It's usually, in this day and age, funny enough, it's probably easier to contact the owner and publisher than ever before.
Yeah.
Yes, there is an expectation you will do that. If you're only using very, very small, tiny parts of it or quotes from it, in education, we're entitled to do that without having to pay or without having to consult the owner. But if you're using large chunks of it, or if it's something you're using frequently and lots of your students and staff and learners are using it, then you do have to make sure that you're paying for it in some way. I mean, again, as I mentioned, collective licenses. Collective licenses are really where you pay a fee to a central body who manages all this for you. So that gives you entitlement to a whole lot of range of type of content. So you don't have to go to one by one to every publisher. You pay in FE, for example. There's a CLA, a copyright licensing agency license for FE, and when a college pays to that license, then they get reams and reams of stuff that they can use.
Yeah. Okay, so it's quite likely that if someone listening to this, they would, if they're part of, say, an FE, or if they're affiliated with a college, if they're working for an organisation, it's worth knowing what that organisation has as with regard to that kind of license. Is that right?
Absolutely. This is one of the critical things I think it's for us to get across, is that to make sure that the arrangement when students and learners are working, if you like, in the work-based learning environment, that the agreement that's made to set up that relationship includes who's responsible for the content that they have to use as part of their learning. So we've got to make sure that we know that we're making arrangements that how they travel to the workplace, that their safety and safe when they're in that workspace. But also one of the things we have to make sure that's covered is who is responsible for the learning content that they're using during that process, and who's paying for it and how is it paid for. So that should be done up front as part of the the contract that's being set up as part of the work-based learning.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. So if someone were to look at some content, they think, right, okay, that's the sort of thing that I want to put into my digital learning resource, whether it be a chart, say an image they've gone and seen an image that image is absolutely perfect. What sort of tick list should they go through with? So should they look to see, is there a Creative Commons license? Is there a copyright notice, say, on the website where they've got it from? What are the things? Do they need to look for that copyright symbol?
Yes. I think yes, there will be. I mean, we're very lucky again in that a lot of content that you can access online is Creative Commons license, for example. Images we can think of particularly, because you can actually search Google or do any other search that limits the results to content that is Creative Commons licensed. Now that won't always be the case. When you want something, it's likely it belongs. It's just one of those I've found in my experiences. The likelihood is that the one you really want, the one to be really useful to you, belongs to Getty Images or something like that. But actually, let's mention Getty Images, because Getty Images, funny enough, they're really a collecting house, where you if you've done a great photograph of something, an engine or a particular aspect of something that an image you've done, you make an arrangement with them. They collect the royalties for the use of your image, so it's licensed. That's what Getty Images does. So they don't actually own them at all. The rights belong still to the owner, but Getty, if you like, collect them. But that's the same with a lot of stuff. If you're someone who owns content, you don't really have the time to go around policing who's using it or who isn't using it. It's normally done by some sort of organization that will, police this for them. And as I said, the Copyright Licensing Agency is one of those whom you can pay a license to, and you can get lots and lots of content. There's a number of them. JISC has a lot of expertise in this as well, and you know, that's just spends all of his time negotiating and arranging licensed content like that, so that it can be used in education without the people using it have to worry about who's paying the fee. But I think this thing of going to the internet and finding something and thinking, well, that's the right, that can be tricky, and it can be time consuming, and it can be wasting time. And I think part of, I suppose, the college and the learner, the college's responsibility is to point learners at resources that they can use and can reuse and don't have to worry about the rights as such. But yes, it is possible to go directly to the rights holder. Often, as I said, now it's much easier now because of the internet. In the same way, it's easy to access stuff. It's easy to find out who owns it and how to contact them and to seek a response. Now, I've done that myself for stuff. When I thought this would, you send them off an email. They say, you explain to them what you're doing with it. You're using it in education. It's just going to be used for this limited purpose. And many times they'll say that's fine as long as they're acknowledged. And they like to be acknowledged, often, people, from where it came from. Now that can be a bit hit and miss, and it can be very time consuming, but it is possible to do.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to you mentioned Getty Images. I remember working at an institution where someone had used an image and they thought it was because it's for education, it's fine, and it was a Getty Images image, and lo and behold, even though it was on a VLE, or it was within a resource, they thought it was fairly low risk, and they wouldn't. But they did get a call from Getty Images to either remove it or to pay for it. Is it a bit of a myth that if it's for education, it'll probably be okay?
It is a myth. It's not a free for all. So and images are particularly difficult because what governs it is this thing notion of what's called fair dealing. So if you're quoting something, if you like, you could be quoting a description or of some sort of process, for example, how Volkswagen changed their wheel or something, or some sort of aspect of that can be quite detailed. But if you take a little extract of that may be fine. But an image is different. It's very hard to use only a portion of an image and do it fairly, because really it's the whole image you probably want. So it is a myth that you can, just because it's education, you don't have to pay for it. That's just not true. And it's something that can be worked out often in advance, and I think it's part of the role the college will play in making sure that the learners have access to content that is reusable. I think that's a very important part of this.
One of the things that we talk about with Creative Commons, I mean, one of the terms that we use is like attribution and things like that. What does the word attribution mean then? If say I'm looking at a Creative Commons license and I see CC BY, which I think is the attribution term, what does that mean?
Well, attribution, I think the simplest way of just saying it is an acknowledgement of who the owner is. So it's like who the photographer is or who the rights holder is. So you say, this is an image that has come from the internet, and the owner is Zach Gribble or John Kelly, and it's almost as simple as that. There's nothing a lot more complicated than attribution than that. Acknowledging who the rights holder is. And
we've talked a little bit about Creative Commons, and if people do want to go to understand a bit more about it, I think it's creativecommons.com/licenses. It lists more there, and say if you go to Flickr or something, you see an image and it's got a license there. It's important that people understand what that license allows them to do, isn't it?
It's worldwide. That's the other very useful thing about Creative Commons. there's the resources you can access that are Creative Commons licensed, from everywhere, from Japan, or it's all over the world. You have access to them if they're Creative Commons licensed. And it's the other useful thing I think to keep in mind is that we should also be conscious that when we're publishing stuff ourselves, that we should consider making it available to others as part for education as well. So we can, if you want to do that, Creative Commons license is the most straightforward way of doing that.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I know in our session, Liz is going to be talking about images and things like that, because images is such an important part of creating a digital learning resource. And we're talking about attribution-free websites, things like Unsplash, and thinking about Pixabay and things like that. And so if it's attribution-free, that means it's completely safe to use, and you don't need to worry too much about the copyright and things like that of images. Is that fair to say?
I think a good rule is that if there's no information on the image, then it's risky to use.
Yeah.
If there's information which clearly says you're free to use this, please acknowledge it in this way, or don't acknowledge it in that way.
Yeah.
You don't need to acknowledge it at all. Then that's fine. But the riskiest thing is to take an image where you don't have any information about what you can and can't do with it. That I would be very wary of that. And I think that's where you're going to get letters looking for bills afterwards, like you mentioned with Getty.
So thinking of best practices, a bad practice is to go to Google Images looking for, if say you're hairdressing, and you find an image on Google Images, I think that's the perfect image, and just lifting it out and putting it into your resource, that's where risk comes, isn't it? And that's where you could find yourself in problems.
Exactly. And I think that increasingly people who put up images like that are providing more information about who owns it, what you can do with it, and what you can't do with it. I mean, I think there's just an awareness of the value of these things increasingly. And, as I said, if you can't find any information about what you can and can't do with the image, then I would be very wary of reusing it. It is worth contacting the owner anyway, separately, and saying, I want to use this in a certain way, and do I have your permission? You may never hear from them, or they may email you straight back and say that's fine. You don't know, but it's worth a try.
Is that slightly left? Is that similar for social media? If you see an image on social media, I mean, things like Instagram or Facebook or something. I know Facebook used to be a commercial photography thing, archive and things like that. But I'm just wondering, if someone sees an image on social media, is it? I think it's good practice to contact the poster and say, do you mind me using it, and things like that.
I know all you young people are using social media, but my understanding of it is likely that the image belongs to the image will belong to someone, and it will belong to presumably the photographer or the person who took the image in the first place. And they may or may not have provided information on how it can be reused. I think you can pick that image up and search for it on the internet and actually find where it originally came from, even though you may have come across it in Twitter or somewhere else. It's possible to find it, or you do have to do some due diligence and find out where it came from. And you can't just assume that it's in Twitter that you can reuse it.
Brilliant. Fantastic. John, thank you so much for that. I know that was a very quick chat, but I think that's really useful. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. As I said, JISC is very strong on copyright for long periods, and we, very, very, very much involved in licensing and negotiating licenses. And I think that we should laud the work that they're doing to make sure that people in education have access to the materials they need to provide the learning they need.